Okay guys, so we know the description of what's going to be on the test. Let's focus in on the four questions right here, number 6, 7, 8, 9, which are solving quadratic inequalities. What you need to do is pretend it's an equation and solve. So we're going to have x squared, and you know what, before even doing that, let's actually set it equal to 0 first. Let's subtract 5x, you'll get x squared minus 4x minus 5 equals 0. And why do I want it equal to 0? Because I could use the quadratic formula to solve. But what I'm going to actually do is quicker than the quadratic formula. I'm going to factor, split, and solve. So that's going to be a negative 5 and a positive 1. And when you split them, x minus 5 equals 0, x plus 1 equals 0. You're going to get two answers, x equals 5 and x equals negative 1. However, those aren't your answers because this is not an equation, it's an inequality. So what do we do next? We need to actually test our values on a number line. So let's put the two critical points right there, negative 1 and positive 5 on a number line, and let's test values that are either on the inside or the outside. So you could test any values you want. I'm going to test the easiest value to test, which is 0, which is clearly in between the negative 1 and 5. I want to test 0. What does that mean, test 0? I'm going to plug in 0 for x up here on the original. So 0 squared plus 0, and on the original 5 times 0 over here. So what do I end up with when I plug in a 0? I end up with negative 5 is greater than 0. And ladies and gentlemen, negative 5 is definitely not greater than 0. That's false. So we know that 0 is not a solution. So where are solutions at? They're on the outside. In other words, if I pick a point on the outside, like let's say I wanted to pick let's get crazy and pick 10, which is way out here. I know for a fact that it's going to work. Why? Because 0 did not work. So I already know that this is going to work. Let me just show that to you. Let's plug in 10 up here. 10 squared is 100, plus 10 is 110. 110 minus 5 is 105. And if you plug in 10 over here, 5x, that's 5 times 10, that's 50. So 105 is greater than 50. So yes, 10 does work. So where are our answers at? They are on the outside of the critical values. They are not on the inside of the critical values. So we need to actually write our inequality as two separate inequalities with the word or in between them. So what does this mean? This means that x is less than negative 1. So let me actually write that. X is less than negative 1. And what does this mean over here? That x is greater than 5. Let me write that. X is greater than 5. And of course, you need the word or between it, and that is your final answer right there, because the areas are apart. So you use the word or. Let me move on and try one more. So here's the second example we did in class. Once again, I'm going to pretend it's an equal sign, and I'm going to set it equal to 0 by subtracting 12. And I'm going to get the new quadratic equation that says x squared plus 2x minus 24 equals 0. And I'm going to factor, split, and solve, which means what times what is negative 24? That if you add together is 2. That would be a positive 6 times negative 4. And that'll give you a negative 24, and if you combine it, it gives you a positive 2. And when you split them and solve, you get two answers. You get x equals negative 6 and x equals positive 4. And again, these are not real answers because it's not an equation, it's an inequality. So we need to go to a number line. And of course, I need to test the values because my answers are either going to be all in here or out here. So they're either apart, or in here. Okay, so our answers are either apart or in here. Okay, so let's test a certain value. Again, the easiest value to test would be 0. 0 is clearly in between those guys. Let's go back to the original. Plug in a 0 for x, a 0 here for x. What is our statement going to say? It's going to say negative 12 is less than or equal to 12. And that is a true statement. Negative 12 is less than 12. So the 0 does work, which means that this is an answer, which means all your answers are in here. Okay? If it wouldn't have worked, then your answers would be out here and here. They'd be out here, right? But 0 did work, so that is a yes. Okay, so what does that mean? It is a solution. That means that all of your solutions are in here. Now, because the solutions are together, the areas are together, we need to write this as a compound inequality written together. Okay, you can't write it as two separate inequalities. You need to write them together. So the answer will be x in the middle, negative 6 on this side, positive 4 on this side, and you simply put the less than or equal to symbols in between them. And that makes total sense because x is less than 4, and if you look over here, x is what compared to negative 6? It's to the right, so x is greater than negative 6. That means that it has to open up to the x when you're comparing x and negative 6.